Officer Marcus Cole marched into the courthouse hallway, wearing his crisp blue uniform and a gleaming badge that he believed gave him power over anyone who stood in his way. He lifted his chin and flashed a half-smile when reporters on either side raised cameras and shouted questions he ignored with proud indifference. Cole had never lost a case in more than a decade on the force, and he trusted that reputation like a shield against any challenge his assignment might bring. Today, he would take a young woman named Elena Parsons to court for speaking out against him, a rare civilian who dared claim he abused his authority. Elena's voice had grown loud on social media after a video showed Cole pushing past her at a city rally, but he was certain no jury would believe her over his uniform. As he passed security scanners and busy deputies, he straightened his tie and reminded himself that rules applied to ordinary people, not to decorated officers like him. It felt unfair whenever someone questioned his motives, but he convinced himself that his badge meant he operated under a higher calling that overrode any small complaint. Still, a part of him wondered if public opinion could tip against him when his face appeared in newspaper headlines alongside Elena's tearful testimony. The courtroom doors loomed ahead with heavy wood panels and brass handles, as if daring anyone to stand against someone as powerful as he thought he was. A hush fell when he entered, and he nodded curtly at the judge before finding his seat behind a polished desk stacked with files and evidence folders. Elena Parsons sat across the aisle in a simple dress, hands folded on her lap and eyes fixed on her lawyer, and Cole noticed how calm she appeared despite the spotlight. He felt a flash of annoyance at her quiet confidence, as if she did not understand how dangerous it was to challenge a police officer in his own domain. He opened his case file and scanned the charges, convinced that his testimony would sweep aside her accusations like dust in the wind. Yet, he could no longer ignore that something felt different when he saw Elena's name in bold letters on the judge's docket sheet. The bailiff called the court to order, and a low murmur rose as participants stood to face the judge's bench, where a stern face awaited the first words. Cole prepared to stand and speak his truth, fully expecting the judge to hang on every detail of his carefully rehearsed story. But as the judge cleared his throat and looked down at the files, a thought flickered across Cole's mind that this trial might not go as he planned. Memories of that afternoon at the rally came back in crisp flashes, the roar of the crowd, the tight swell of protesters, and Elena stepping forward with a camera. He remembered grabbing her arm to move her back and thinking it would go unnoticed if no one recorded that moment on their phones. Instead, dozens of cameras capture his hand on her skin and her shocked face as she stumbled backward under his grip. Anger pulsed through him at how quickly that video spread, how strangers now called him a bully rather than a hero in blue. He had hoped the public would dismiss Elena as an attention seeker, but instead they rallied behind her with comments and hashtags that haunted his dreams. Cole's mind raced as the judge asked him to stand and state his name for the record, a simple step that now felt heavy with implications. He rose and cleared his throat, trying to sound calm but hearing a tremor he could not hide in his own voice. Elena watched him closely, and he felt her steady gaze burn like a light shining on every secret he had buried. He spoke his name and rank clearly, then offered a concise summary of the day in question, confident his words would carry weight. But when Elena's lawyer rose to question him, a new tension crackled across the room like electricity before a storm. Cole answered each question in turn, drawing on years of practice in trials and interviews, until he felt the jury lean forward with curiosity. In that moment, he realized that his badge might not protect him if he fumbled a single answer or showed a crack in his composure. He had always seen his power as absolute, but now he trembled under a scrutiny that no shield of metal could withstand. Each question seemed designed to chip away at his confidence, and he could almost hear Elena's voice echoing inside his mind. She had spoken clearly about feeling frightened and hurt when he forced her back, and her words clung to him like heavy chains. As the lawyer pressed him on his motives, Cole felt a knot of doubt tighten in his chest and wondered if his years as an officer had blinded him. He tried to steady himself, adjusting his posture and taking a slow breath that barely calmed the storm inside. Sweat stung his collar, and he fought to keep his eyes fixed straight ahead, ignoring the judge's curious glance. For the first time, the badge felt heavier than it had ever been, as if it weighed down the truth he was trying to hide. He had believed he operated above such consequences, but Elena's courage made that belief quake on its foundation. With each answer, he sensed the courtroom shift, as jurors exchanged looks and the air thickened with uncertainty. And in that single moment, he understood that justice might not bow to authority when the story spoke louder than any badge. The crash of his assumptions reverberated quietly through the room, leaving him to face a judge, a jury, and a truth he could no longer deny. Elena stood and faced the jury, her voice steady as she described the weight of injustice she felt pressing down when Officer Cole's badge seemed to tower over her rights and dignity before a court, leaving a quiet echo of her resolve in the still room, reminding those present what justice truly means. She recalled the sun baking her back and the sudden shock when a firm hand grabbed her arm and jerked her away from protesters lifting their voices in unison, painting a vivid scene of collective hope. With each word, her eyes held hurt and strength as she explained feeling small under the grip of a uniformed stranger who acted as though her freedom meant nothing, a feeling she vowed not to forget. The jurors leaned forward, their faces a mix of concern as they listened to Elena's name, the moment her confidence shattered like glass beneath pressure, a moment that carved itself into her memory. She described the sharp gasp she released when Officer Cole's hand tightened, and how her heart thudded until she feared fainting from shock, her breath catching like a soft storm in her chest. Elena said she had never met an officer who treated her like an enemy instead of a citizen, and she admitted that she once felt proud of her city until that moment, a memory that stung like a sudden cold wind. As her words flowed, a hush fell over the gallery, and even the judge paused to fold his hands and nod at the sincerity in her voice, a brief pause filled with earnest respect. Counsel objected, claiming her account was emotional, but the judge allowed her testimony, reminding both sides that feelings could be honest evidence. Elena went on, describing the prickling sweat on her skin when she realized the badge on Cole's chest could hurt her instead of protect her, a thought that sent shivers through her mind. She painted her fear turning to anger when she saw cameras and realized her helpless moment was now viral on social media, a silent alarm that spread like wildfire. She told the court how messages of support poured in online and said their words gave her courage to defend her dignity here today, a testament to the power of shared compassion. At times her voice quivered, and she paused to breathe deeply, but she never let silence break the bond she had formed with the jury, a bond forged by honesty and strength. One juror furrowed his brow at Cole, who sat stiffly and avoided Elena's gaze, while he scribbled notes as if weighing each word on scales of justice. Elena spoke of hopeful chants that turned frantic the moment she felt a shove, betraying the promise of fair treatment she had believed in, a broken promise that weighed on her heart. She said she had fallen to the ground, bruised and stunned, before straightening up determined not to let fear silence her, a vow she spoke to herself softly. She described walking away, limbs trembling and eyes bright with tears she held until she knew someone was listening, a comfort that warmed her spirit. Her lawyer guided her with simple questions that let her share every detail, and she replied with clear words carrying her lived truth, a clear declaration of her story's importance. The courtroom lights shone above as she said the badge meant protection, but felt like a weapon in that instant, a moment that altered her view of safety. She listed the moments before and after the shove in order, as if reading from a diary she kept for emergencies she now revealed, a secret once hidden but never forgotten. Elena said her voice trembled at the station, but her fear turned to resolve when she saw her lawyer waiting to stand with her, a support that filled her with quiet hope. She shared her mother's hug after the march, a reminder of safety even when the world outside seemed unfair, a reminder of why she spoke out so bravely. She told of a flyer she made with friends, warning others of their rights and the risks of speaking up, a caution wrapped in steadfast courage. She offered a small smile as she recalled the community rallying around her with encouraging words, a chorus of voices lifting her up. Elena said she met city leaders who promised to review policies, but she believed true change happens when peers decide in court, a conviction she held in her heart. She looked at Cole, her eyes reflecting both sympathy and firmness, and said she did not hate him but wanted fair treatment, a gentle plea carried on firm resolve. Silence returned when she said she imagined walking in his shoes and hoped he learned compassion from this trial, a wish she offered with earnest sincerity. The defense asked if she sought attention, but Elena replied calmly that she wanted only justice for herself and others, a simple request for truth to prevail. She said she disliked the spotlight but felt compelled to speak because silence would let injustice repeat, a warning she delivered with calm resolve. She explained she believed in the rule of law and that officers must answer for actions like any citizen, a belief she held close like a guiding star. She described carrying a small card listing key rights and showed it when asked by the jury, a clear gesture of her readiness. She recounted how friends shielded her from the crowd, and she nodded gratefully at their quick help, a moment of gratitude shining bright. Elena smiled as she said she discovered a courage within her she never knew she had, a discovery that surprised even her own heart. She said she felt responsible for showing that one voice can matter against a uniform and a badge, a message that no symbol can silence truth. Her final words were simple but powerful as she told the jury she trusted them to decide fairly, a trust she placed in every juror's hands. She sat down gently, letting out a soft breath as she folded her hands, and the courtroom held its breath with her, a hushed moment of shared understanding. A murmur arose when the bailiff called the next witness, and Elena caught her lawyer's relieved glance, a quiet sign that her story mattered. Cole watched her leave the stand with a furrowed brow, and he felt a shift in how he saw his own authority, a subtle shift that hinted at reflection. The judge reviewed notes and said bystanders would testify next, moving the trial into its next phase, a step forward in the journey toward justice. Elena returned to her seat and met her mother's warm smile in the gallery, a silent bond passing between them, a bond built on hope and belief. The courtroom buzzed as tension and hope mingled, moving everyone closer to the search for truth. The bailiff called the first witness, a young man named Jamal Aziz, to the stand and asked him to swear the oath by raising his hand and promising to tell the truth. Jamal adjusted his cap and said he had joined a rally with his friends under a bright sky, eager to support a peaceful protest and hear speakers discuss fairness and respect. He remembered the air filled with hopeful chants, a sea of determined faces holding signs that demanded change and equal treatment for everyone in the city. Jamal said he filmed Elena from the side, noting her calm voice as she narrated events into her phone, capturing the scene so that no one could deny what happened. He described seeing Officer Cole stride forward with purpose, his polished boots echoing on the pavement, and his uniform crisp, as if he were leading a parade rather than controlling a crowd. Jamal's video showed Cole reaching out suddenly and gripping Elena's arm so firmly that she stumbled backward, her phone tilting but still rolling. He said Elena caught her balance, wiped a strand of hair from her face, and lifted her camera higher to keep recording every second of what she believed was wrong. While on the stand, Jamal pressed play on his phone to show the jurors the moment Cole's hand closed around Elena's wrist in a way that looked neither gentle nor necessary. The judge and jury leaned forward as they watched the clip, their faces lit by the courtroom monitor showing the clear footage of that critical instant. Jamal paused the video where Elena's eyes widened, and he pointed out how her fingers tightened around the phone, holding on for support and proof. He described the row of brick buildings and tall trees lining Berry Street behind him, giving jurors a clear sense of location and distance. Jurors nodded as the clip showed bystanders stepping back in surprise, murmurs rippling through the crowd like wind through leaves. Elena's lawyer approached calmly and asked Jamal if he heard any warning siren or shouted command before Cole reached for Elena, and Jamal shook his head firmly. He said there was no alarm or voice alert, just the sudden motion that ended Elena's words mid-sentence and left her off balance. Jamal replayed the footage to show Elena's face shifting from focus to fear as she searched for help among uniformed officers who did not move at first. As he spoke, the defense team whispered quietly, their papers rustling in a soft rhythm like birds startled in flight. One juror made a note beside the words, "No warning," nodding slowly as they absorbed Jamal's clear description. Jamal then explained that after the initial grab, more officers approached, but not until Elena had taken several steps away under duress. He said her bright red coat fluttered like a flag in a breeze when she stumbled, making her stand out against darker uniforms. Jamal admitted he did not move forward to help because he feared interfering with an officer's duty, but he stayed close enough to record each detail accurately. The judge paused the footage and asked if Jamal edited the video in any way, and he assured the court it was raw, uncut, and played at normal speed. Jurors watched black marks on the timeline bar where Elena spoke and where Cole's hand gripped her, comparing what they heard with what they saw. Jamal described the moment the crowd parted like water, creating a clear path as though they suddenly realized something was wrong. He said another officer stepped in after a beat, guiding Elena behind a barrier with a soft voice that contrasted sharply with Cole's firm grip. Jamal explained how that gentle tone gave Elena a moment to breathe and turn toward her friends, showing compassion amid the chaos. The defense asked if Jamal saw Elena do anything threatening, and he replied she only held her phone to record, never raising her voice or making aggressive moves. Jamal spoke plainly, emphasizing that he saw no threat from Elena, only an officer taking action without provocation. As he stepped down, jurors whispered among themselves, comparing the video's clear truth to the officer's written report. The bailiff then called the next witness, a woman named Malia Ortega, who said she stood beside Elena holding a sign about safety and respect. Malia described seeing the same footage but focused on Elena's face when she realized the officer's grip would not release. She told the court how relief washed over her when another officer arrived and spoke to Elena in a calm, reassuring tone. Malia said that gentle officer placed a hand on Elena's other shoulder and guided her to a safe spot instead of pushing her away. She noted the contrast between the firm grab and the soft guidance. The difference is clear as night and day in her memory. The judge asked if Malia believed Elena was in danger, and she replied she feared Elena might fall or be hurt by the sudden force of the hold. Malia's voice carried to the back of the room where reporters jotted down words about restraint and duty from officers. The defense attorney questioned whether the crowd's movement forced Cole to act, but Malia said the crowd only moved when Elena took steps backward. Malia paused to blink back a tear as she spoke of Elena's courage to stand firm in front of a line of wielded power. Her words settled softly in the room, and even stern faces in the gallery showed a flicker of empathy. When Malia sat down, Elena caught her eye and offered a brief nod of thanks, and her lawyer gave a reassuring smile that spoke volumes. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as the next witness prepared to testify, each new truth bringing them closer to understanding what really happened that day. The judge leaned forward, his robes rustling softly, and called Officer Marcus Cole back to the stand, asking him to raise his right hand and promise to tell the truth under oath before the entire courtroom. Cole swallowed hard, smoothed the crease of his uniform shirt, and lifted his hand carefully while glancing at the jury, whose attentive faces made him feel the weight of every eye in the room. The defense attorney adjusted her glasses, turned to face Cole, and spoke in a calm, measured tone as she began to ask him pointed questions about the events of that day. She tapped the video screen lightly and said, "Officer Cole, does this clip accurately reflect your actions when you approached Ms. Parsons at the rally?" Cole blinked, stared at the frozen image of himself reaching for Elena's arm, and then nodded reluctantly, admitting, "Yes, that is how I moved." The attorney pressed on, her voice steady. "Please explain why you found it necessary to grab her in a crowd that appeared peaceful and orderly." Cole glanced down at his folded hands, then looked up and replied, "I believe someone nearby was at risk of tripping into the street, and I acted quickly to prevent a potential accident." She raised an eyebrow and said, "From your position on the sidewalk, how could you see a risk severe enough to justify such force without first issuing a warning?" Cole paused, his throat tightening before answering, "The crowd was shifting fast, and in my experience, a verbal warning might not reach someone focused on recording events around them." The jury scribbled notes as the attorney pressed a still image from the video onto the screen and asked, "What do you see in this frame that supports your claim of imminent danger?" Cole studied the snapshot of Elena holding her phone up high and said, "Her camera blocked my view of the roadway, and it looked like she might step backward into oncoming traffic." The attorney clicked to the next image and asked, "Officer, did you recognize that the person in the video was Ms. Parsons before grabbing her arm?" Cole's eyes flicked toward Elena's seat before he looked back at the attorney and admitted, "No, I did not know her name or identity in that moment." The judge leaned in, and the attorney followed up, "Did you consider using your radio to call for assistance instead of intervening yourself?" Cole rubbed the back of his neck and said, "I assessed the situation as urgent and felt I could act more quickly on my own than waiting for backup." A soft murmur ran through the courtroom as the attorney asked, "Do you regret that decision now, knowing Ms. Parsons felt frightened by your actions?" Cole paused for a long beat, then said, "If I could do it over, I would certainly issue a clear warning first and perhaps use less force." The jury leaned forward when the attorney asked, "Will you train to warn citizens before using physical force during crowd control?" Cole answered, "Yes, Academy guidelines emphasize issuing a verbal warning before any physical intervention, but I did not follow that protocol in my haste." The attorney tilted her head and inquired, "Why did you choose not to warn her at all, given your training?" Cole took a steady breath and replied, "The crowd's movement and noise convinced me there was no time to communicate without risking delay." The jury members exchanged glances as the attorney pointed to Elena's medical report and asked, "Are you aware that Ms. Parsons sustained a bruise on her wrist from your grip?" Cole hesitated, then said, "I did not see a bruise at the time, but looking at this report, I understand that my actions could have caused that injury." The judge scribbled a note as the attorney asked, "Did you offer to check on her well-being immediately after the incident?" Cole's shoulders slumped slightly and he admitted, "No, I was focused on crowd management and did not turn my attention back to Ms. Parsons until later." The courtroom fell silent when the attorney asked, "Do you believe you fulfilled your duty of care toward her in that moment?" Cole closed his eyes for a second, then opened them and said, "I realize now that I should have ensured her safety first and foremost, as my badge requires." The attorney nodded and in a softer tone asked, "What steps have you taken since to address the impact of your actions on Ms. Parsons?" Cole looked down at the table, then answered, I have reviewed body cam footage with my superiors and attended a refresher course on crowd interaction and de-escalation. A juror jotted down his answer as the attorney said, "Thank you, officer." No further questions, and stepped back with a respectful nod. The judge announced a brief recess, and Cole stood to leave the stand, adjusting his belt buckle as his heart pounded in his chest. Reporters scribbled notes in the gallery while deputies whispered among themselves, the tension in the air thick as courtroom curtains. Cole walked past Elena's seat and caught her eye for a moment, noticing her calm expression even as he felt a pang of guilt. He took a seat at the defense table, picked up a glass of water, and ran his hand over the badge pinned to his chest as if seeking reassurance. The judge banged a gavel lightly to signal a 5-minute break, and everyone rose, stretching limbs and murmuring anticipation over what came next. Cole exhaled slowly, closed his eyes, and reminded himself that honesty now might be the only path to redemption. Elena watched him with a steady gaze, and Cole sensed her unwavering determination to see justice served. Outside the courtroom doors, sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows on a marble floor as spectators shuffled into the hallway. Cole's mind churned with every question he had answered, wondering how the jury would interpret his admissions against the law he had sworn to uphold. As the break began, a low hum of conversation filled the room, and Cole realized that the rest of the trial would depend on the truth he chose to tell next. The bailiff called the next witness, Dr. Harold Moore, a civilian expert on use of force policies, to the stand and asked him to swear the oath to tell the whole truth. Moore adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and introduced himself as a former police captain who now spent his days training officers in safe tactics and de-escalation techniques. He explained that he had led an academy for 10 years, studied thousands of crowd control incidents, and written manuals on how to balance protection with respect. The prosecutor placed a chart on the screen and asked Dr. Moore what the average warning time should be before any physical contact in a nonviolent protest. Moore said research shows officers should give at least 5 to 10 seconds of clear verbal warning to reduce injuries and build trust with civilians. He described studies where that extra pause allowed people to comply and avoided needless force in nearly 60% of cases. The jury leaned forward as Moore noted that holding a phone camera up does not block danger in a safe crowd and should never trigger a grab. The prosecutor clicked to a page in Moore's report and asked if that situation resembled what happened to Elena Parsons that day. Moore nodded, saying the facts lined up exactly. No weapon, no violent threat, and no recorded warning before force was used. He handed each juror a copy of his summary and walked them through key findings in simple language. Jurors scanned the pages as he read aloud the top bullet. Verbal warnings save lives and protect rights. The prosecutor asked if Moore had reviewed Officer Cole's body camera audio and training records. Moore replied that he had and found no trace of any radio call, verbal command, or announcement at the moment of contact. The courtroom monitor replayed the silent clip, and jurors watched Elena's startled face when the officer's hand closed around her wrist. Moore explained that department policy requires officers to repeat warnings if a first request goes unheeded, then wait again before intervening. The prosecutor asked whether that standard would apply even if the crowd was moving and noisy. Moore affirmed it would, adding that officers are trained to project their voices and use hand signals if needed. He described drills where recruits practice shouting, "Step back," and giving space before any touch so everyone heard the command. The prosecutor then asked Dr. Moore to rate Officer Cole's actions against policy on a scale from 1 to 10. Moore paused, then said he would give it a 3 because Cole neither warned Elena nor allowed adequate time for compliance. Jurors scribbled his rating as they exchanged glances at the clear gap between training and action. The prosecutor held up Elena's medical report and asked if Moore believed her wrist bruise was consistent with an unannounced grab. Moore looked at the medical notes and said the bruise size and shape matched what happens when someone is suddenly restrained. The jury shivered slightly at the thought of pain Elena must have felt in that moment. The prosecutor asked whether badges grant absolute power to bypass these rules. Moore shook his head and said, "Badges grant authority, not permission to ignore policy or human dignity." He added that officers serve the community and must follow guidelines designed to protect both public and police. The judge leaned in and asked if Moore had any final recommendations for the jury's consideration. Moore replied that they should weigh the need for safety against rights protected by law and judge whether the force used was truly necessary. The prosecutor thanked him, and he stepped down, his briefcase tapping softly on the wooden floor as he left the stand. Elena let out a slow breath and squeezed her lawyer's hand, relief flickering in her eyes after the expert confirmed her account. The prosecution rested its case shortly thereafter, and the judge announced closing arguments would begin the following morning. Officer Cole sat back at his table with his defense attorney, their heads bent together as they whispered last-minute strategy. The courtroom emptied into a low hum of conversation, and Elena joined her family to gather their notes and prepare for the verdict. Outside on the courthouse steps, reporters asked Elena how she felt, and she quietly said she trusted the jury to do what was right. Cole slipped out a side door with his attorney and walked to a waiting car, his badge catching the afternoon light with a dull gleam. Elena paused to look back at the building, certain that honesty, evidence, and expert testimony would guide the final decision. Clouds gathered overhead as she and her mother headed home, each step carrying the weight of what had been revealed in court. Late that night, jurors retired to deliberate, planning to review the video, medical report, manual excerpts, and expert opinions before choosing a verdict. Across town, Officer Cole sat in a dim apartment, turning his badge in his hands and wondering how his actions would be judged when justice spoke last. The jurors filed into the deliberation room carrying notebooks, printed transcripts, and exhibits that glinted like evidence under soft fluorescent lights as they took their seats around a polished oak table. Juror 1, a retired teacher with a gentle voice, reminded everyone of the judge's instructions to decide based only on facts presented in court and the law as written in statutes and precedents. She then recited the legal definition of assault, emphasizing that any use of force must be both necessary and reasonable under the circumstances. Juror 2, a local shop owner, spread out a still image from Jamal's video and noted how Elena's arm was grabbed without a single audible warning or command. He underlined the phrase "no warning" in his copy of the transcript and passed it around for fellow jurors to inspect. Juror 3, a pediatric nurse, referred to Elena's medical report, pointing out the bruise's shape and position matched a sudden, tight grip rather than a gentle guidance. She described seeing similar injuries in her clinic when patients were restrained without proper caution or instruction. Juror 4, an accountant, asked whether Officer Cole's training record showed any instances of using force without verbal precautions. Juror 5, a graphic designer, sketched the scene from memory, marking Elena's red coat and the angle of the officer's arm to help the group visualize exactly what had happened. Juror 6, a high school student working part-time at a cafe, played a short clip on her phone to illustrate the absence of any voice command before the grab. The group discussed the defense's claim that Cole feared a crowd surge could push someone into traffic, but jurors noted Elena stood well behind the barricade on the sidewalk. Juror 7, a software engineer, pointed to the rally map, marking where barricades and streets lay and confirming there was no immediate danger to justify the use of force. Juror 8, a stay-at-home parent, spoke of her own fear when seeing force used unexpectedly, saying that clear warnings could have prevented panic and injury. Juror 9, a veteran librarian, read aloud an excerpt from Dr. Moore's report on verbal warnings, highlighting that studies show warnings avert force in most peaceful demonstrations. Juror 10, a small business consultant, weighed Officer Cole's admission on the stand that he bypassed protocol, questioning whether authority should override established safety rules. Juror 11, a freelance writer, noted how Cole's regretful tone did not excuse the lack of warning mandated by policy, recalling his own words on the stand about following protocol next time. They revisited the judge's instructions on the burden of proof, reminding themselves the prosecution had to show guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Juror 1 reminded the group that reasonable doubt arises when evidence fails to align clearly with legal requirements, such as issuing warnings before force. Juror 2 referenced the video transcript again, stressing that Elena's calm stance and focused recording demonstrated she posed no threat when grabbed. Juror 3 agreed, adding that no officer body cam audio captured a single warning, backing the nurse's view that protocol was overlooked. Juror 4 said policy manuals required officers to project their voice and use hand signals if needed, even in noisy crowds, and no such measures appeared in the records. Juror 5 shared the sketch, and several nodded in agreement that it matched the video frames exactly, strengthening the group's shared view of what occurred. Juror 6 raised a possible defense argument that crowds can shift unpredictably, but others pointed out that witnesses described the rally as peaceful until Cole's action. Juror 7 suggested they pretend to meet as officers, striking a careful balance between safety and rights, and asked if anyone would yank a stranger without warning in those shoes. Juror 8 answered no immediately, saying she would always call out "step back" before any physical intervention. Juror 9 summarized that an officer's duty includes protecting citizens and preserving trust, both of which are lost when warnings are skipped. Juror 10 reviewed Elena's composed testimony and compared it to Cole's brief answers, concluding her detailed account carried more weight. Juror 11 reminded the panel that badges carry authority, but not immunity from following rules designed to keep everyone safe. They discussed possible verdicts, guilty of assault or justified use of force, and jurors parsed the difference under the law. Juror 1 moved to take a preliminary vote, asking each juror to state their lean, guilty or not guilty of using force without warning. One by one, they spoke softly. 9 said guilty, 2 said not guilty, and the room held its breath as jurors considered each dissenting view. The group revisited key evidence, the silent video, the medical report, and expert testimony, focusing on whether the lack of warning created reasonable doubt about justification. Juror 7 and Juror 11 rechecked the training manual's warning requirements, while Juror 2 reread the judge's instructions on necessary force. After careful debate, the 2 jurors in doubt agreed the evidence showed no justification for bypassing warnings, and all 12 reached the unanimous decision. They filled out their verdict forms on official paper, folded them, and sealed the envelope as prescribed by protocol. The bailiff escorted them back into the courtroom, and each juror found their original seat, carrying the envelope that held Justice's call. The judge asked the foreperson to stand, and the bailiff handed over the verdict envelope with a respectful nod. The foreperson opened the envelope slowly, unfolded the sheet, and announced clearly, "We, the jury, find the defendant, Officer Marcus Cole, guilty of unlawful use of force without verbal warning." A hush swept the room. Elena exhaled in relief and tears glistened in her eyes, while Officer Cole's face went pale as he grasped the weight of the verdict. The judge thanked the jurors for their service, set sentencing for 2 weeks later, and banged the gavel, marking the end of a trial where courage and truth overcame the power of a badge. 2 weeks later, the courtroom filled with murmurs as people gathered for sentencing, including Cole, Elena, their families, and reporters. Judge Ramirez entered and sat behind his bench, adjusting his glasses and reviewing the pre-sentencing report. He asked the clerk to call the case and for the parties to stand as he read the jury's unanimous guilty verdict on 1 count of unlawful use of force. Elena sat in the gallery, her hands clasped, feeling a quiet sense of closure building like a gentle wave in her chest. Cole rose as the judge began to speak about the seriousness of using force without warning and its damaging effect on public trust. The judge noted Cole's previously clean record but emphasized that even one lapse in judgment could erode community safety. He described Elena's courage in standing up for her rights and how the jury's decision reinforced that no one is above the rules. The judge reviewed the sentencing guidelines, explaining factors such as Cole's rank, years of service, expert testimony, and victim impact. He paused to look directly at Elena and said the court recognized her pain and the restraint she showed under pressure. Cole watched the judge's words and felt each one press into his conscience like small stones in a pouch. The judge then announced that Cole would be suspended without pay for 30 days and required to attend additional de-escalation training. He added that Cole must perform 50 hours of community service focused on youth outreach and civil rights education. The judge explained these measures aimed to rebuild public confidence and help Cole learn from his mistake. Cole nodded slowly, the weight of the sentence settling on his shoulders like a heavy cloak. His defense attorney asked if the court would allow Cole to begin community service after his suspension, and the judge agreed. Elena's lawyer thanked the court and asked if Elena could address a community forum about the case, which the judge permitted. Outside the courtroom, Elena emerged into bright sunlight, blinking against the glare and feeling freer than she had in months. Reporters swarmed her on the courthouse steps, and she answered their questions with calm dignity about speaking up for rights. Cole slipped out a side door with his attorney, head bowed and voiced low amid whispered advice on next steps. Over the following weeks, Cole completed training workshops where he practiced giving clear verbal warnings and de-escalation techniques. He also fulfilled community service at a local youth center, teaching children about safe protest and respectful dialogue. Elena participated in a city forum, sharing her story directly with officers, activists, and neighbors to build understanding. She spoke about restoring trust when individuals hold each other accountable with fairness and respect. The police department issued revised guidelines requiring officers to use clear warnings and document crowd interactions thoroughly. Cole submitted a public apology letter describing his regret and the lessons he'd learned from the trial and sentencing. Elena read the letter and felt cautious optimism, believing real change could take root if words led to action. Months later, the city reported a drop in excessive force complaints, and community leaders credited the new training. Cole and Elena met at a protest safety workshop, shaking hands with careful respect and acknowledging each other's shared humanity. They posed for a photo the city shared to promote dialogue and mutual understanding between citizens and law enforcement. Cole wore a badge tag reading "Honor, a Trust, a Respect," a small sign of the commitment he carried from his mistake. Elena continued her advocacy, organizing workshops on citizen rights and protest safety procedures for local schools. The city council passed an ordinance requiring police transparency and regular community feedback sessions. Elena testified at the council meeting, her clear voice echoing in the chamber as she reminded lawmakers why accountability matters. Cole attended as a guest, quiet and attentive, observing officers following the new protocols and policies. He realized that trust must be earned one respectful interaction at a time, and that a badge is earned through service, not fear. Elena saw Cole's efforts and felt that the courtroom's lessons had grown into real change on city streets. The community's view of justice grew hopeful as open dialogue replaced tension and mutual understanding replaced fear. Cole gave a speech at the youth center about accountability and learning from mistakes, sharing his own story as a cautionary tale. Elena listened from the audience, proud that her voice had helped shape a better path forward for everyone. In the end, both learned that justice is not just about verdicts or sentences, but about growth, respect, and the promise of a shared community. Months passed after the trial, and the city felt a quiet shift as officers and citizens began to meet with open minds in parks and community centers. Elena spent her mornings writing blog posts about her experience and sharing tips on knowing your rights at peaceful events. She posted simple guides with photos and bullet points that hundreds of readers saved on their phones before attending rallies. Officer Cole returned to duty wearing his badge with a new sense of care, reminding himself each morning that his rank came with responsibility. He practiced sounding calm and clear whenever speaking to pedestrians and protesters, making eye contact and using a steady tone. City Hall hosted regular forums where residents could ask officers questions about rules, safety, and respectful conduct. Elena joined one forum as a panelist, sitting beside Cole's trainer and community organizer to explain why warnings matter. Cole listened as Elena spoke about fear and dignity, and he nodded in agreement when she said a kind word can prevent harm. After the forum, they took questions together, often finishing each other's sentences when advocating for clarity and respect. A local newspaper ran a feature story titled "Bridging the Badge and the People," showing photos of Elena and Cole working side by side. In schools, teachers used a simplified version of the case to teach students about fairness, empathy, and the law. Kids in civics class debated whether uniforms should come with reminders about rights, and they drafted posters for rallies. At a summer art fair, artists painted murals of officers and citizens shaking hands under the words "Trust Through Truth." One mural showed a badge next to a heart, symbolizing service guided by compassion rather than force. Community groups invited Cole to speak at youth camps about listening before acting, and he shared stories of the trial and his growth. Elena volunteered at the same camps, leading walks and showing young people how to record events safely and respectfully. Together, they created role-play exercises where kids practiced giving and following clear instructions in crowded spaces. Police cadets now learned that day's lesson first in their training, practicing loud, simple warnings before any physical movement. Cole supervised a drill where recruits shouted, "Please step back," and gave space, then guided volunteers away without touching them. He corrected their tone and body language until every cadet could project calm authority rather than abrupt force. Elena attended one session and praised the change, telling recruits how it felt when a warning gave her time to breathe. The department posted new signs in precinct lobbies listing citizens' rights and officers' duties, making the rules clear to everyone. At the yearly City Awards, Cole received a commendation for community outreach, a different kind of honor than he had known before. Elena accepted a community service award for courageous testimony, wearing the same dress she'd worn in court as a sign of memory. Reporters asked how they felt standing together, and both said the trial taught them that change begins when people listen. Their partnership inspired similar efforts in nearby towns, where forums and youth programs popped up like fresh sprouts. One town invited both of them to help write a handbook titled "Safe Protest, Safe Policing," which sold out within weeks. Community leaders thanked Elena for speaking up and thanked Cole for learning and teaching officers a more humane approach. In the weeks before the next election, candidates promised to fund ongoing training and expand citizen oversight panels. Voter turnout among young people rose, as many remembered seeing people treated fairly in headlines and forums. Police recruits now recited a promise that included respect for rights as part of their oath, printed in every academy booklet. Elena started a neighborhood group that met monthly to share stories, keep policies in check, and build trust year after year. Cole sometimes joined as a guest speaker, listening more than talking and answering questions about law and safety. Over dinner one night, Elena's mother told her she was proud of how far the city had come from that single courtroom moment. Cole texted his wife that he felt hopeful for the first time in years, believing his badge could symbolize service rather than control. Trees planted near the courthouse bore plaques marking Justice Day, the trial's anniversary, reminding everyone what had changed. Citizens wore ribbons on that day, blue for police, white for civilians, in a silent pledge to protect one another together. Elena and Cole stood side by side at the plaque unveiling, smiling as the mayor spoke about unity and responsibility. They released doves in a small ceremony, each bird flying toward the sky like a promise of respect taking flight. In that shared moment, the city remembered that justice lives best when people trust each other and listen before they act.